Mr. Secretary, let me begin by asking some questions about this is where I left off. And this is about the employee at HHS and who's continued to make the news due to what has been regarded, and not my view, but illegal actions. And this is based on court decisions. This is the Jane Doe decision. I want to talk about Scott Lloyd, Director of HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement. Job description, Director. In the Homeland Security Act, responsible coordinating and implementing the care and placement of unaccompanied alien children in federal custody, ensuring that the interests of the children are considered in making decisions about their care and custody, responsible for identifying shelters, other facilities to house children who have entered the U.S., and for ensuring that the shelters remain suitable. Is responsible for overseeing the placement process, includes identifying sponsors in the U.S. who can care for the unaccompanied minors. The vast majority are family members placing children with those sponsors. The director is responsible for compiling and publishing a list of individuals who can provide guardian and attorney representation services for UACs. As I said in my opening remarks, Scott Lloyd is not a doctor. Lawyer, I have high regard for lawyers, but he's not a medical doctor. And in my view, he has shown disregard for the Constitution, overstepped the boundaries. He has abused his authority, forced his own personal beliefs on immigrant women in his custody over and over again, violated their constitutional rights. He has put their lives in danger, considering subjecting a woman to unproven medical experiments. He has personally tried to block a rape victim from getting an abortion. He wrote in a government memo, and I quote, "Here there is no medical reason for abortion. It will not undo or erase the memory of the violence committed against her, and it may further traumatize her. I conclude it is not in her interest." Not a medical professional. His actions have been overruled by a federal judge. We met on February 6th in my office. You said you needed to look into the situation. And you said, we are trying the best we can to comply with any legal obligations that we have, both under the statute, constitutionally. We believe we're doing things right and correctly, but it's a very difficult task, a very difficult charge. Since my time is limited, and not for, don't want to cut you off, but kind of yes and no's on these things. Have you met with Mr. Lloyd since becoming the Secretary of HHS?
So I have met with Mr. Lloyd, yes.
Okay. And what have you had? What's your nature of your conversation?
So I have, following up on our discussion and discussion with others, I have looked into this, and I do want to be very clear that I don't believe this is an issue involving Mr. Lloyd. This is actually, it's a very serious charge that we have, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. We are charged by statute with these children and to look out for their interests. And there is actually a long-standing policy dating back to 2008 for providing serious medical services to these children, including involving discussing with their parents if we can reach them, parental notification and input as appropriate, complying with state law. It's a very serious charge. This is not about Mr. Lloyd. This is a long-standing how we deal with this very difficult issue of serious medical care for these children.
Mm-hmm. But it's in 1997, the federal settlement in Flores versus Reno requires the ORR to provide emergency health care and family planning services. This is in 1997. This is with regard, most recently, you had a Texas state judge who ruled that Jane Doe was mature enough to make her own medical decisions. So the questions are you concerned that Mr. Lloyd is violating the 1997 federal settlement, is violating constitutional rights of these young women? Is it appropriate for a political appointee to override the determination of a Texas state judge? And do you think it's appropriate for policies by HHS or any office within to take precedent over the law and the U.S. Constitution?
So we will absolutely comply with the law and the Constitution as determined by the courts, but also part of the law is complying with that very unique statutory obligation we have to look out for the interests of these children and their unborn children. Part of that is talking to the parents to get input, complying with state law. It's a very difficult case-by-case situation, and if we get different guidance from the courts on how we need to be implementing that, we certainly will do that.
Well, the courts so far have ruled in favor of these young immigrant women, and would appear that Mr. Lloyd we need to hold him to the law, and so that he should not be interfering with what is the constitutional right of access to health care. That is there. And we know that we have, whether you like it or not ideologically, there is a law that says they have a right to health services and to legal and safe abortions. My final question, Mr. Chairman, is that, look, I shouldn't really have to ask this. This is a gentleman who should be gone from this position. He is not a medical doctor. He is not a psychiatrist. And reaching these children's families is often lengthy, and it's a process that puts their lives in danger. I'm just going to ask you flat out, Mr. Secretary, when will you fire Mr. Lloyd?
This is simply not an issue of Mr. Lloyd. This is the statutory obligation of the Director of the Office of Refugee Resettlement to coordinate and implement the care and placement of these minors, including providing for serious medical service to them and following the.
So you're not going to do that, and you're going to put their health in jeopardy.
Has gone well beyond. So I want to give you a chance to respond if you care to add anything.
I certainly appreciate any concerns that you have, but I do want to make very clear, this is not about Mr. Lloyd. This is the long-standing policy and procedure of the Department of Health and Human Services dating back at least.
This is about access to health care. Access to health care.
Serious medical service, absolutely.